On the docket today, we are keeping a close eye on two high-profile court cases. The Kobe Bryant rape case. The question is it really coming apart at the seams? The prosecution has suffered another defeat just days before jury selection. Plus, Scott Peterson's former lover, Amber Frey, may be back on the stand today for some cross-examination. We're waiting for that. That would come from high-profile attorney Mark Geragos. And this comes as the jury continues to hear more of those secretly taped conversations between Scott and Amber. Let's listen.
You've been dishonest with me, Scott.
I know it.
You weren't with who you were on Thanksgiving. You weren't who you said you were with in Christmas. And I was hurting already about that, Scott. How is that fair to me?
It's not fair to you at all, Amber. It's not fair to you at all.
Well, now with more on these two cases, we are joined by former federal prosecutor Michael Wilds. He's also the mayor of Englewood, New Jersey, and criminal defense attorney Eric Chase. Thanks to both of you. Michael, to start with you, these tapes are dramatic and they're emotional for some of her family members and his as well, if you read the accounts. But is it enough? A lot of court watchers have said what they need to show is that he was obsessed with her, that she was the reason that he would have killed his wife.
I think it's a risky tactic to rely heavily on these tapes that may put a jury out and lose the facts that are presenting here place him not only at the murder scene, but ultimately his unorthodox behavior, his callousness, the fact that he begged spontaneity and yet at the same time shows that he had a preconceived trip that he wanted to take, the fishing trip. All of these facts present more questions. I think you have to pull the lens back and not rely heavily on these tapes. You're not going to get a letter from a dictator in a political asylum case. You're not going to get a snapshot of him killing his wife off a boat. What you are going to do is put together a case. And yes, because he lies this pathologically, he is capable of murdering his wife. The insensitivity to this unborn child is paramount as well.
Eric, in terms of the defense approach, we may see Mark Geragos take on Amber Frey today, or it may come tomorrow later in the week. I suppose they have to walk a fine line there, though, because she really has become a sympathetic character to a lot of people who've been watching.
Well, what we know for sure is that there are tapes that the prosecution hasn't played that Mark Geragos is going to play. There are tapes that show that Amber was almost a stalker, that she was calling Scott 14 times, leaving 14 messages in one night, that in conversations she was getting hysterical and saying, what about me? What's going to happen with me?
Yeah, but wouldn't that be natural for a woman who found out all this crazy information about a guy she thought she was falling in love with?
Well, I think that some of those tapes actually occurred before, but more importantly, we're dealing with credibility. And the prosecution in this case has suffered so many credibility blows that what they're presenting to the jury about Amber being completely duped and the fact that Scott is pursuing Amber and not the other way around, they're going to take a real credibility blow when Mark gets up and says, you know, hey, look, it's actually the other way around at least half the time. What I think the prosecution has done in this case is they've forgotten to think about the defense case. They should have put some of these tapes on while Amber was testifying for them, and that would have certainly lessened the blow of Mark Geragos' coming cross-examination.
Michael, Scott Peterson never admits on these tapes that he did anything, if he did, and some have speculated that he might have been assuming that she was either working with police at that time or would be in the future, somewhere along the line as these tapes progress. Do you believe that?
I believe, again, that there's too much concentration on these tapes, and ultimately you have to pull the lens back on the entire landscape. The fact is that it is the job of the defense attorney to minimize the relevance of these tapes, to make sure that there is no reasonable doubt, and that ultimately to say that there is no signed confession. In these cases, Jane, they never present themselves. There are extraordinary circumstantial forensic evidence here. If looped together properly by the prosecution, plus the tapes, no matter whose credibility, a massage therapist or a gentleman who would fool around on his wife and a child that is yet to be unborn, I think, bottom line, this will pass and he will be convicted.
Quickly, we want to move to Kobe Bryant. Eric, there's going to be no delay. Jury selection is set to start August 27th. Some have speculated that the case is going to be over before it begins. What do you think?
I'll believe this trial is going to happen when I see the jury in the box. I still believe the prosecution is looking for a graceful way out. It's really tough for a prosecutor when they're not getting along with their star witness, with the alleged victim, and that's clearly happening in this case. They did not want that civil case filed. She filed it anyway. I'll believe this trial is going to start when it starts.
And Michael, former prosecutor, you can speak to that.
Well, I believe that a speedy trial will be fair to both the accuser and the government in this case. I think it's shameful that a victim is going to be further victimized by having to declare her sexual history But again, in this matter, I think, Jane, the forensics and the DNA evidence will actually lock this case up. In both cases, we're asking ourselves, as people see violations of marital vows, ultimately, who are we going to trust? And I, for one, as a former prosecutor and as an attorney now in private practice, will trust the evidence, the forensics, the science, and the process, not what people say.
All right, it's got to be a lot of pressure on that prosecutor's office at this point. Michael Wilds and Eric Chase, we thank you both.
Pleasure.
Well, Great Britain launching a massive rescue operation as flash floods put parts of the United Kingdom underwater. Have you seen these pictures? We're live in England with the latest on the rescue efforts.